Yeah, I mean, it's not the end of the world if that doesn't get done, but it looks a lot better. What? What? This you? Why couldn't hear me? Yeah, he's talking about putting one of the microphones hanging down right here by the projector and one about halfway down. He said, they're so good, go pick up anybody just talking normal. I said, cool. Air conditioner is going to be the problem. We'll test them. I'll be here when they install it. The problem is, that blows out. So we're just going to have to do trial and error. I mean, he said if you're standing right here and you can hear that, that might pick it up like that, but it won't be as loud as that one is right next to it. So you'll still hear some of the fan, some of the AC. But
I don't know. Well, like the old program we used to record just audio on, you could isolate that sound, put it out.
I can actually put a filter on it through our streaming software. I put a noise gate on it. Yeah, I might have to mess around with that.
The only thing I ever heard, you can find a dead slot where that was only sound you can hear, isolate that, and remove it. And then usually didn't hurt the audio too bad, but you can hear it, you can hear the voice better, sometimes the capability.
Yeah. I don't know what is with my phone number recently, but I've been getting so many spam texts recently, and it's all the same thing. They either call me Mac or Craig. I got two that were the same exact thing from two different numbers that said the same exact thing. Hi Craig, it's Amanda, long time no see, how have you been? So I wrote wrong number for the first one, and they said, I'm so sorry, this is one of my partners, but I have to say I messed up the numbers. I'm so sorry I may have disturbed you. So I said, it's okay, have a good day. No, I'm having a bad day today. I sent the number to you due to my mistake. I'm so sorry. Well, then somebody sent one, hi Craig, it's Amanda, long time no see. I said wrong number, and they said the same thing, I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. I said, it's funny you say sorry, but yet someone sent me the same message, word for word, from another number. Stop texting me, and I sent a screenshot of it.
Yeah, I typically stuff like that, I don't even, I just block.
Yeah.
I don't even reply, just like, no, bad text, I don't reply.
Well, I got one as soon as I got home today. Just said hi. So I said wrong number. And they said, my sister said that you were very nice and told me to contact you. And I'm going, uh-huh. And then they said, add me on Telegram. Give me a phone number. Please message me. No. Let's okay, let's go home real quick. We'll be right back.
Say, see you in a minute, Jason. You say, see you in a minute?
Nope. Okay. Before you go,
she got a text.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool deal. Yeah, she made
Maybe
it.
denied it next week.
Okay.
So I guess Dave.
I could have sworn I was right behind him driving, but they don't own a Suburban, they own a well, strangers may not get the sled tonight.
Yeah.
Yep, I saw it. Was it last Sunday that you used the circle highlight feature in your sermon?
Tried. That was, yeah. I could.
It's awful touchy. Yeah, show up anything there,
And I was trying to do it, I was like trying to do it over my shoulder. which
but.
was
I
hard.
got you.
Everything's backwards.
You okay there? So you've seen, I showed you some of the dragons that I printed, right?
Look.
Yeah, but the dragons that can
Oh,
stand
yeah.
up. This is what I'm printing right now. Got giant wings. It's pretty close to that. Printers. Clock. That's pretty, I think it's got that tiny little head left. But no, have you seen my Facebook post from there?
I saw one with this, he had like this stuff laying out.
Yeah, but this was not razor.
I've got a lot more good stuff that I want to do. Is that for the future for her?
Yeah. You know, it took me 20 minutes, 5 minutes, set it up, 15 minutes. Wow. Yeah, this wood, I got this from Michael's. I can't remember exactly what that wood is, but it was normally the wood that I've been using from place west of the interstate in Salina, in ours. I have to burn at 300 millimeters per second. I'm burning this at 5,000 per second. Yes. It's close. I think the description I read, it's close to balsa wood,
Yeah.
but I mean it's heavier.
Yeah.
But just the burning properties. Hey, did you give Mr. Jason a hug yet?
No.
Can you have a hug?
Oh, yay!
I had plans to work them off. I'm only working on BBS stuff, but for about 20 minutes until all the way went out swimming. We had that later out of the day, and I fell asleep. And then she stayed asleep for about an hour. And then she woke up and then leaned on me and slept for about an hour. Oh. That was in the bathroom. Of course, okay, well, that's why I told him. I thought it was either a rat snake or a bull snake or a herder snake.
Because I think the bull snakes are the ones they've got. Very simple.
Yeah.
Somebody shoved it in a dustpan, and Chris Moore was carrying it out. She kept it out. And it was getting kind of aggressive, like just kind of rearing up. It's like, what's he gonna do? Well, we're gonna fight the whole way, so we trapped its head. I set him on his tail. Just cut its head off, put the head under a vehicle, and threw the body out that way. Okay. Oh, don't need a crown. Oh, don't need a crown. You say do or don't need a crown? No. Don't, okay.
So because they'll be here and they can keep them on the road.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for doing that.
Appreciate it. She does piano at some point. She actually we talked about teaching to drive. Just down to the house to a section of empty gravel road, and she drove half a mile, barely touching gas pedal, just kept on
Gotta start somewhere.
and talked her keep using the gas pedal around too. She's fine. Told her now, the only way we can come to this was so this wasn't one of them. Yeah, where you been on the bill? Quit touching it, so we have to get yours. So,
Mandy was I'm just gonna be there in case something happens.
well, that's what she needs. So we can get like excited. And overload the
He did. He did.
Regular 15. Challenge. She was just hoping to win a couple game out.
Yeah.
That wasn't good.
Yeah.
Murray's not young either. Murray's not young either.
Yeah, I think it's hard to
You have sunglasses today?
She went to the chili better.
What one of the Kyle kids? They were over there. Yeah. That wasn't the one that hit You can hit it. Well, there was a day when I did this. I remember playing with that's what I told him, they're not gonna get right down the line. Yeah. Near side. He was staying way off. And I managed to do it, you know, and try again and both. And so then the next time he did that side, I said, and I'm gonna do it again. You stay over there and do it again. Yeah, twice an hour again.
Good, Terry. How you Good evening. Glad everybody's here this evening. We have a few announcements before we begin. I want to remember the Delaney family, the birth of Ruby James Russell, born to Haley and Brett on June 20th, 8 pounds 7 ounces, 20.5 inches long. We're from everything I've seen and heard, everything's going well, and just want to keep them in our prayers. Don and Cindy and Courtney will be coming back from Texas this weekend, so remember them as they travel. I'll be traveling Friday to be with my friend Paul in Texas for the week, and remember him in your prayers as well. He's still struggling with cancer and is just having a hard time, so I'm going to hopefully be able to have a good week with him while I'm there. Also got a note from Vicki Settle this morning that Mike Kenny's graveside service will be August 5th at 11 o'clock here at the McPherson Cemetery. It'll just be a graveside service, so remember that, get that on our calendars, and make sure that we go there to support that family after Mike's passing. Any other announcements before we begin tonight?
5:38. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. When darkness fails his lovely face, I rest on his unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. His uplifts covenant, his blood support me in the rounding flood. When all around my soul gives way, he there is all my hope and stay. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. When he shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in him be found, dressed in his righteousness alone, full blessed to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. 'Cause 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 'cause
God, we love you so much. We thank you for today. We thank you for the sunshine, the rain we received recently, God, and we would pray that you would send some more from the cross. God, we thank you for sending us another day that we can come together as your people, as a congregation of believers here in person, that we can study your word, that we could meditate on it. We can fill our mind with you, with your word and the scriptures that you have written to guide our lives. God, we thank you for giving it to us. We thank you for the word of life, the word that brings life, and the word that we can depend on, the hope that we have is built on this word. God, we thank you for giving it to us. God, we pray that tonight we would set our minds on things above, that we would be able to love, and we would look more like you every day. God, we thank you for the messages that we've heard throughout our lives on you and your greatness. We pray that we continue to think about how awesome you are, think about how magnificent and powerful and wonderful you are, and you care about each and every one of us. Thank you for the love that was shown for us on the cross. Again, we pray for a productive study time. And thank you very dearly for the blood that was shed to pay for our sins. We love you. We love your word. We love your son. Thank you.
Good evening. Let's see here. Well, Johnny and I just started kind of teaching together a couple weeks ago, and you'll notice that he's not here tonight. So he's not here tonight. There was a procedure this week. I think Leslie had a dental procedure, and I wasn't sure if they'd be here tonight. And then I'll be out of town next week, so Johnny will be up here alone next week. So we're trying to get settled into a routine or pattern if we both abide by it. But things are as they are sometimes. So it's a one-man show tonight. That's okay. Well, it's okay for me. I don't know about for y'all. So we just started 2 weeks ago. We started working our way through this book by Wendell Winkler, Heart Diseases and Their Cures. This is a book that's been around a while. I can remember using this book. I want to say we used it maybe when I was a teenager. And then I've been through it at least on one other case. Yeah, copyright 1972. That was before I was a teenager. So I think we went through it in our teen class when I was growing up, and then later on went through it again. So it's full of good material, and Wendell Winkler was just a phenomenal man, a phenomenal preacher, and a wealth of knowledge and information. So last 2 weeks we talked about overcoming unforgiveness, and this week we're going to work our way into the subject of envy. Envy, we're of course going to look at it from a bunch of different angles and think about it. But one thing that came to mind just early on as I was considering this topic and thinking about it was it seems to me that if I can say the word, envy is kind of a behind the scenes sin. I don't think we often look at a situation or we see something going on and we point to it and say, oh, that's envy. But a lot of times what we look at and what we see and what we recognize as sinful behavior is behavior that's been motivated by envy. Envy is kind of the behind the scenes thing. It's the root cause, but it portrays itself through other things like lying or cheating or greed or lust or even things like murder and things along those lines. I mean, it can just run the gamut of the ways that it manifests itself and the things that it leads to. So envy is one of those things that while we don't often just maybe it's not the thing that we talk about a lot, or not the thing that we see as being out in the forefront of things. It's one of those behind the scene things. And if we can catch it early, if we can put it to rest, then we avoid all those things that it leads to, if that makes sense. Go ahead.
It's different than jealousy.
Well, we're going to kind of use jealousy and envy more or less interchangeably. There is some nuance to it, and I didn't get into a word study too much, but envy, and it's weird. I looked at a couple of different sources, and the way Wendell Winkler portrays it in his book kind of went one direction. Then I looked at another article that kind of went the opposite direction, like it totally flip-flopped everything that was said. So we'll talk about the definition of envy here in a minute, and maybe talk about how it relates to jealousy just a little bit. But we are going to kind of use those interchangeably. Some of the verses that we'll look at use the word jealousy, and depending on the translation you look at, it might say envy in older translations, or it might say jealousy in newer translations, or something like that. So we're not going to get too nitpicky there, but still want to recognize that there is some nuance difference there. So let's just talk about that right from the beginning. What is envy? Well, and this is quotations from Winkler's book here, but he quoted the Webster's Dictionary as being chagrin, which that's the reason I use that definition, because I like that word right off the bat. Chagrin, or discontent at the excellence or good fortune of another. Resentful, begrudging. So something good happens to somebody else, we see that good thing happening to somebody else, and it irritates us. It irks us. We don't like it. We don't like that something good happened to somebody else. That's envy. And so jealousy, maybe if we're going to look at a little nuanced difference, jealousy has more to do with like covetousness and wanting the stuff that they have, rather than the ill feeling towards them for having it. But they kind of go hand in hand. They kind of are so similar that it's hard to separate the two. So Cruden's Bible Dictionary goes on to add, very similar definition, but then goes on to add the idea of there being a distinct idea of malice or spite. Not only do they have something nice and I don't like it, but now I want something bad to happen to them because they got that nice thing. I want to see that nice thing destroyed in their life. I don't want to see them continue to flourish. And so it goes past just being not liking the fact they have it, to where I want to see them lose it. And then in Cruden's Bible Dictionary often is the one that says, it's often kind of interposed with the idea of jealousy, or translated as jealousy. And then he added the idea of to look against. This is kind of the etymology of the word, or the meaning of the word itself. To look against, or to eye with evil intent. That's envy. You look at something with a specific intent of wishing or wanting evil to befall that person, then that is envy. Okay? So there was another, and I thought I put this in the thing, but I typed it out on a different page and I forgot to add it in here, so I'll just read it to you. The Greek philosopher Socrates wrote that envy is the daughter of pride, the author of murder and revenge, the begetter of secret sedition, the perpetual tormentor of virtue. Envy is the filthy slime of the soul, a venom, a poison, a quicksilver, which consumes the flesh and dries up the marrow of the bones. Socrates didn't have anything good to say about envy. So it just, it's just kind of the pit of the worst of everything. Just
as we're talking about this, the definitions that we have in front of us have been very, very, extreme according to our culture. Our culture has this phrase, agreeing with envy, and it's just something you just kind of throw out there, because envy's okay as long as you're not actually hurting anybody.
Right.
And so it's, it's this Socrates' version was this, the gruesome, this is just the worst thing that can destroy, it's the author of murder and all these different things. And to our culture, well, envy is just, everyone has it, and you just don't do anything too bad.
right. And I like that distinction. That gets right to the heart of what we've spent the last, before we got into this study, Johnny and I went through some lessons from the Sermon on the Mount. One of the things that we saw that Jesus did in Matthew chapter 5 was, you compare yourself, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And then he'd say, you have heard that it was said, but I say. And he said that like 5 or 6 times through chapter 5. And this is exactly what we would get into with that. Well, the world says, envy's okay. You look at what somebody else has and you lust after it, you want it, you kind of are mad at them for having it. But as long as you don't act on that, that's okay, because you didn't do anything wrong. But Jesus says, no, it's a matter of the heart. It's a heart thing. And if you're not taming the heart, if you're not producing the right fruit in your heart, then the actions are not what we're looking at. And so I appreciate that. That's exactly right. And as we get into some of this, we'll see that the Bible teaching about envy is definitely at odds with how the world views envy. And this is kind of the summation of envy, the idea that honor given to another is dishonor to me. If you got something good, you took it away from me. That means I can't have that good thing, or I deserved it more than you, so I should have gotten it. And since you got it now, you have dishonored me by accepting that good thing. So that really kind of sums up the idea of envy. So are there any examples of envy in the Bible? You gonna go with yes on that one? Okay. Well, let's look at a few examples. If you're not going to throw any at me, I'll throw some at you. How about this one? Genesis chapter 30, verse 1. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she became jealous of her sister, and she said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I die." Okay, and so you know the story of Jacob and Esau, and Jacob went to the land of Isaac his father, and or Rachel his say the word, Rebecca his mother, and went and found a wife, found her brother and married his daughters. Okay, there, I finally got it out. And was supposed to marry Rachel, but got tricked into marrying Leah, and he didn't really love her, but God saw her with compassion and opened her womb, and she started having children, and Rachel could not have children, and it was a source of conflict. And Rachel looked at Leah's good fortune. They're sisters. Now, you guys, some of you have sisters. I have 3 sisters. I can't imagine my sisters experiencing something and me being mad about it. Like, they're having children and we're not, or they're having, they're succeeding in some way and we're not, and I'm mad at them for succeeding. But that's the way Rachel saw it.
But look at what Rachel had.
Yeah,
right. And how many children she had.
Yeah.
Jacob didn't.
Right. It's Rachel had something that Leah didn't have, and Leah had something that Rachel didn't have, and they should have been, should have is a strong word, but it was envy that drove Rachel. And think about the things that happened after that. She gave Jacob her handmaid, and then he had children with the handmaid, and then Leah gave Jacob her handmaid. He had children with that handmaid, and then, it just led to a lot of heartache because of that envious attitude. Cain and Abel. We'll mention them here in a minute. They're in my slides, but you're out of order. So, so hold on to that thought. But you're exactly right. Yeah, Cain and Abel is a good one. Next up for me here was Isaac, and this was one. This was from the book. I wouldn't have thought of this one probably. I know I wouldn't have thought of this one. It was a little more obscure, but it uses the word we're talking about here. Isaac in Genesis chapter 26. Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. The man became rich and continued to grow richer until he became very wealthy, for he had possession of the flocks and herds and great household, so that the Philistines envied him. And that led to all kinds of problems. They stopped up Isaac's wells, and it led to conflict between Isaac and his servants and the Philistines that were in the area because of their envy of how well Isaac was doing. Not that Isaac was stealing from them, he wasn't mistreating them, he wasn't, there was nothing wrong with those business practices toward it. They just looked at, we've been farming that ground for generations, and it's never produced for us the way it produces for you. We've been here forever, and our families aren't prosperous and rich like yours is, and so you have taken away from us by your success, is the way they viewed it, and that was the envy that led them to mistreating Isaac. So there's another example. So those are just a couple of Bible examples. We're going to look at more as we go through. Got kind of a list up here in a minute, and we'll talk about some. in greater detail than others. But the next section that he gets into, he always has several different sections in the text of the book here, the way he divides up the unit. And he wants to talk about the nature of envy. Like, we're going to talk about, the nature of God. That would be like his characteristics and what define him. If we're going to talk about the nature of love, we would talk about all the different things that accompany love and the way we define it and those kind of things. So the nature of envy is what he has us looking at next. And just a few of the ones that he mentions here in the book. The nature of envy is that it's earthly. We talked about there being a big contrast between the way the world views envy versus the way the Bible teaches about envy. And look at James chapter 3, verse 14 and 15. It says, "But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic." And so the idea of it being something that is foreign to the thinking of God. God's wisdom leads us in one direction, but wisdom that includes envy or jealousy is an earthly, natural, demonic wisdom that takes us in a completely different direction.
And demonic insinuates that it's from Satan.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we would use those almost interchangeably, like worldly and satanic would be almost interchangeable words there. So it's just a threefold description. In case we don't understand what earthly means, it's natural, it's worldly. In case we don't understand what those two mean, let's get even more specific. It's demonic. It's from Satan himself. And so I think those all three are synonyms there to define or describe the nature of somebody who views the world with a heart of jealousy or a heart of envy. If that's what motivates us, if that's what drives us, then we're viewing the world through a worldly lens. We're viewing things through a natural or demonic lens. The nature of envy, and I like this word, it's insidious. It bears ill will. It drives you to do bad things. That's what insidious means. And so it's not just a self-contained sin. It's not just a kind of a thing that you would sit there and say, well, that's the sin. You can say that, but envy leads to other things. It drives us to do other things. So Psalm 73, verses 2 and 3, the psalmist there says, "But as for me, my feet came close to stumbling. My steps had almost slipped, for I was envious of the arrogant as I saw the prosperity of the wicked." And so, he was on the right path. We talked about that as part of the Sermon on the Mount. Walking the straight and narrow road. He was on the right path, and he almost stumbled from that path. He almost slipped from that path because of envy. It was envy that put him at risk for making the wrong decisions that would take him from that path. And so we have to be aware of envy, that it is insidious. It will get into the heart, and it will drive us in the wrong direction. Another passage under that thought there, it's insidious, Philippians 1, verses 15 through 17. And this one is interesting because of the contrast that we'll see here. Paul there writing about his own situation, that he had been imprisoned and what that led to. He says, "Some, to be sure, are preaching Christ even from envy and strife, but some also from goodwill. The latter," that is, the ones doing it from goodwill, "do it out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former, those that are preaching the gospel due to envy and strife, the ones preaching for that reason proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition rather than out of pure motives, thinking to cause me distress in my imprisonment." Think about that for a moment. They were envious of Paul's station, of his importance, of his fame, of his apostleship. They were envious of those things, and so they went out to preach the gospel to try to bring shame to Paul. They were doing the right thing. I mean, they should have been preaching the gospel, right? That's what we're supposed to do. But they were doing it for the wrong reasons, with the wrong motivations, and so it was gaining them nothing. Now, to the people who heard them, if they were preaching the truth, which Paul says they're preaching the gospel, well, that's the truth. If they were preaching the truth and doing it and converting people, that's good for the people that heard it. But it's gaining them nothing. It is not drawing them closer to God. It's not It's not building for them or storing up for themselves treasures in heaven, because they were doing it with the wrong motive. And so consider the idea of envy being so insidious that it can even be a motivation to do the right thing. But if we're doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, it's what good does it do us? What have we gained? And so that's where it really gets to the heart, where we have to examine our own motives and our own thoughts and our own intents to make sure that we are doing things for the right reason. I thought that was an interesting way of presenting how insidious envy can be. Another part of the nature of envy, it brings misery. It's a companion. Misery is a companion of envy. Esther chapter 6, we have the story of Mordecai and Haman. And Mordecai was Esther's kinsman, or her uncle. And, he had thwarted a plot to kill the king. And the king was reading from the journal one night and realized Mordecai had done this for him. And Mordecai had never been honored. And so Haman comes in the next morning, and the king says, how can I honor the man that the king wishes to honor? And Haman, in his hubris and his arrogance and his pride, thinks, well, who would the king want to honor more than he wants to honor me? I'm the best guy around. And so he gives him the idea. You take a prince of your kingdom, and you have this man you want to be honored, me, and you sit him on your horse, and you put on him your robe, and you read him through the town and say, this is what happens to the man the king wishes to honor. And then what happens? He said, yes, that's a great idea. You do that for Mordecai. And that just was awful for Haman to have to do. And after it's over, Haman does what he's supposed to do, and it says Mordecai returned to the king's gate. It didn't change Mordecai's life. Mordecai didn't get puffed up by it. He didn't get a big head. He didn't get arrogant because of it. He went back to doing what he'd always done, which was standing at the king's gate worrying about Esther. But what happens to Haman? Haman hurried home mourning with his head covered. Why did he do that? Because of envy. He was envious of the honor that had been given to Mordecai, honor that he thought was due to him, but was given to another. And because of that envy, it was his downfall. He ends up dead because of the way that he envies the honor that Mordecai got. Another thing about the nature of envy, it is a cancer. Proverbs 14 verse 30 says, a sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones. It just destroys what it touches. Envy, there's no good end to letting envy into our hearts. Any thoughts on the nature of envy? Next, we want to talk about the evil company that envy keeps. And this is something that we stated from the beginning. It's not just envy itself, it's the things that accompany envy that often are the more visible things that we look at. So Galatians 5:19, and in Galatians 5, we'll talk more about this later on as well, but Galatians 5 has that fruit of the Spirit passage that we're so fond of, and we sing with the kids every Sunday, but it starts off by talking about the works of the flesh. And now the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions, envying, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these, of which I forewarn you, just as I have forewarned you, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Now, we've been talking about the kingdom all year this year on Sunday mornings. How important is the kingdom of God to what we believe, to who we are as God's people? Well, if we are God's people, we need to be part of his kingdom. And if we can't be part of his kingdom with these things in our lives, then we need to understand that. And envy and jealousy are two of those things in that list, that if they are words that can be used to describe who we are as a person, or the things that we do as a person, then we're in trouble. We're removed from the kingdom. So we need to make sure that we're not in the presence of envy because it's never just envy. It will always lead to other things. How about 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 3 through 5? If anyone advocates a different doctrine and does not agree with sound words, those of our Lord Jesus Christ, and with the doctrine conforming to godliness, he is conceited and understands nothing, but he has a morbid interest in controversial questions and disputes about words, out of which arise envy, strife, abusive language, evil suspicions, and constant friction between men of depraved mind and depraved of the truth, who suppose that godliness is a means of gain. So there again, that warning from Paul to Timothy, the young preacher, as he's instructing him on how to conduct himself. Encourages Timothy to stay away from things that will lead to envy. And the things that lead to envy here is that morbid interest in controversial questions, disputes about words, that getting into the things that depart from the heart of the gospel, getting into to topics that don't draw us closer to God. And those are the areas that we find envy. If we're talking about something that draws me closer to God and draws you closer to God, how can there be envy in that? How can I be envious of Justin if he's studying in a way or he's doing something in his life that's drawing him closer to God? Shouldn't I be happy for that? And shouldn't I be questioning him about, hey, how do I get in on that too? How can I encourage you to keep doing that, and how can you encourage me? But it's these things that draw us away from that gospel, that draw us into the side areas where envies and disputes and those things arise.
Well, and even sometimes that may even cause someone to say or do something that's going to hold Justin back from
Right.
continuing to grow.
Yeah.
It's going to discourage him. And it's going to.
Cast a stumbling block, yeah. And that's exactly what envy does. If I look at the success that Justin is having or anyone else, and I have envy for that, then it's natural that a natural outpouring of envy is that I'm going to want to make him stumble or make him not succeed further. Because what I really want to do is point at him and say, I knew it wasn't true. I knew he wasn't really drawing closer to God. I knew he wasn't really the person he was claiming to be. Because that makes me feel better. That elevates me above him. And that's what envy does. And so, see what you get when you come home, Justin? You get picked on during the Bible class. So that, envy is just it's a bad deal all around, and we don't want to get wrapped up in it.
Don't forget it's demonic.
Yeah, it is demonic. Romans 1, 28 through 32. This is there at that end of Romans chapter 1, where there's that progression of things that God turns his back on, that God, people delve so deeply into sin that God cannot go with them. God can't enter into those realms. And this is the end of that section, so we're getting to kind of the peak or the height of what it means to be sinful. And so here in beginning verse 28 it says, and just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. And although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. I mean, that list is a scary list of things. That's the list of things that we don't want in our lives. That's the list of things that God does not condone and will not abide. He will not accept. And envy is right there on that list. And envy is a motivator behind many of the things that are on that list. And so we have to be aware that taking that worldly view that, I can harbor envy towards another person as long as I don't act on it. As long as I don't really try to cast that stumbling block, as long as I don't really, do anything to try to act out that envious feeling I feel, it's just me. It's between me and them, and it doesn't matter. Tim?
That's the biggest point of all, is the fact that first everything our Father tells us is for our benefit more than anything else.
Absolutely.
To not let those things eat you alive.
Right.
yes, you hurt others with it too, but you destroy yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's, we talked about that over the last 2 lessons with forgiveness, the idea that, me forgiving Justin when he sins against me is not about Justin. It's about my relationship with God. And it's about restoring relationships. And through my forgiveness, I can restore the relationship with Justin and I can restore my relationship with God. Envy is not, it's not about God, controlling us or God having that kind of, lightning bolt mentality where he's just waiting for us to mess up and he zaps us. It's because he knows that if we involve ourselves in that, if we pour our hearts into envy, it's going to eat us up. And it's not good for us. It's not the best life we can live. Sam? Sam?
I think it's interesting. It says they give party approval to those who practice it.
Right.
We have a saying that we use as a dog-eat-dog world that implies that we're all fighting for the same thing.
Right.
We all have to push each other out of the way and try to get the thing from everybody else.
Right. You're exactly right. Yeah, it is, I might as well be envious and act on that envy because other people are going to do it as well, whether it's at my company where I work or in a hobby or a sport or whatever it is. I might as well do all I can do to win or get my share because that's the way everybody else is going to do it. And I'm going to miss out if they do it and I don't. Well, that's not the way we should live. Teresa?
And then with all that you were just saying, as long as I don't act on it, but you can only control yourself so long until you're done.
Yeah, and the real truth is you will act on it eventually. Even if it's not in a way that you recognize as being motivated by that envy, if you harbor that envy, eventually it will come out in some way. You're exactly right. Well, here's some ideas there that envy leads to further sin. Envy keeps evil company. And these are just, we're not going to look at these because I knew we wouldn't have time to read all the passages, but we can just mention them briefly and kind of mention how envy played a role. Jim, there you go. I told you it was up there. Cain killed Abel. And in 1 John, it's interesting that a couple of these things are Old Testament events, but then when they're referred to in the New Testament, they're referred to within the context of jealousy or envy. And so in 1 John chapter 3, verse 12, he was envious of his brother. He was jealous of how God viewed his sacrifice. And so, why did Cain kill Abel? Abel, because he was jealous, because he was envious. And that's it. Why did Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery? They were tired of hearing about how great his life was going to be because God was going to bless him. Sam?
Jacob and Esau falls into this, right?
Sure,
Lying
yeah.
to your own dad
Yeah.
To try to steal the birthright.
Right? Yep. Jacob was jealous of Esau's birthright, of his inheritance, and he stole those based on that envy. And then once he had stolen them, Esau was jealous of the fact that he had stolen them. He was going to kill his brother as soon as his dad died. So there's envy all around on that in that story. There's envy between Jacob and Rachel and Leah's dad, Laban. Thank you. When he's there and Jacob is being blessed by God and Laban sees the success that Jacob's having, there's envy there. And so there's all throughout that story of the patriarchs, there's envy.
I never really thought about those tonight, but really the two prostitutes that Solomon was trying to decide whose baby it was, really, she stole the other one's baby.
Yeah. Her baby lived and mine didn't. And that's not right. It's not fair. And so I'm going to steal her baby. And I thought another one that's even grimmer or darker than that is during the siege of the siege of Jerusalem under Hezekiah. There was the two women that came to him. Yesterday we agreed that we were going to eat our babies, and yesterday we ate my baby, and now she's hidden her baby, and we can't eat today, and I'm mad at her. Where's her baby? We need to eat. And that's envy. That's those are extreme scenarios, extreme situations. During the Exodus, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram led a rebellion against Moses, saying, God doesn't speak only through you, he speaks through us as well, and we'll prove it. And they were not able to prove it. But they were envious of the relationship that God had with Moses. They were envious of the power that Moses had, of the authority that Moses had to be able to lead the people. Why did Saul pursue David and try to kill him? Why did he try to pin him to the wall with a javelin? Why did he follow him out into the wilderness and try to kill him? because he was envious of the fact that the kingdom had been given to David and was not going to pass on through his son. Matthew 27:18. Let's look at that one. This is maybe the biggest one on the list. Anytime we invoke, something about the crucifixion. But in Matthew chapter 27, as Jesus is being taken around to different, he's been taken around and tried in various places, and he's standing before Pilate. And 27:18, it says, and this is actually Pilate saying this. So in verse 17, when therefore they were gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that because of envy they had delivered him up. Really, guys, you're going to go through with this? You have the opportunity here to crucify an actual insurrectionist, an actual bad guy, or you have the opportunity to crucify an innocent guy motivated by your envy. And Pilate thought, surely common sense will win out here. Surely they won't be that motivated by envy. But look what envy drove them to do. It drove them to release a criminal, an insurrectionist, a murderer, and it led them to crucify the innocent Son of God. That's what envy does. It drives us to sin. And then in Acts chapter 5, it says the high priest was envious of the apostles, and he had a couple of them locked up there in prison in Acts chapter 5. So other examples I'm sure that we're not thinking of or that we haven't mentioned in the Bible that have to do with envy and what it leads to or how it drives people to commit further sin. But that is the insidious nature of envy that we have to be very, very careful about and very aware of, that we don't get caught up in those things. We want to just quickly note, we need to just lay it out there. Envy is condemned by God. Envy is one of those things God says don't do, just in case we missed it through the stuff we've talked about up to this point. Well, yeah, you've said all these bad things about envy, but does God ever say don't do it? Well, yes, he says don't do it. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 1, therefore putting aside all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and slander. Put those things aside, lay them away. The language there is like casting off old clothing. You lay it aside when you get the new clothing. And so that's what we do with envy. We lay it aside. It's no longer useful to us. And then Galatians 5, verse 26, let us not become boastful, challenging one another, envying one another. Let us not do those things. He's talked about in the earlier verses we already looked at, walking in the flesh. In the middle section there, just before verse 26, he talks about walking by the Spirit. And here he says, if we're walking by the Spirit, this is how we'll be. We won't become boastful. We won't challenge each other. We won't envy one another. So the Spirit and envy have no relationship with each other. Okay, and then finally, is it prohibited? Yes. Romans 13:13. Let us behave properly as in the day, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual promiscuity and sensuality, not in strife and jealousy. So look at the company it keeps there in that list of things that Paul says are prohibited, that we're not to be involved in. Carousing, drunkenness, promiscuity, sensuality, strife, and jealousy. That, if you want to know where envy rates on God's list of actions, it ranks with those things. That's what he thinks of it. Okay? Well, the real thing is, how do we overcome it? It's good to know what it is. It's good to know how bad it is. It's good to know that we're not supposed to do it. It's good to know what it leads to. But the bottom line is, if it's in my heart, if I'm dealing with it, how do I get rid of it? Don't just tell me it's bad and then leave me there, right? So if it's something that we're struggling with, what do we do?
I think humility would be a good.
I hope I have the passage on there that would deal with that. I hope I do. I kind of cherry picked from some of these, so I hope I have one there. I'm not sure if I do or not. I can't remember. If not, we'll turn to it if we get time at the end, because it is a good one. well, the first thing we need to understand is that love is the remedy. Love is the remedy for envy. And first of all, we need to understand on one end that envy is born of hatred. That's where envy comes from. You can't be envious of somebody that you love, and so if you are envious of somebody, it must be because you hate them. That's the only conclusion we can draw. Titus 3:3 says, "For we were also once foolish ourselves, disobedient, deceived, enslaved to various lusts and pleasures, spending our life in malice and envy, hateful, hating one another." I mean, that pretty well states it. If we are envious of somebody, it is not motivated by love. It can't be. It has to be motivated by hatred. And so that's a sobering thought to me, to think that I could harbor some envy and still, yeah, but I'm still praying for them that they'll do okay, and I still love him. He's still my brother. But man, I wish I was doing as good as he was, or I wish this, or I wish that. Those two thoughts are not compatible. If we are loving somebody, then we are not envious of them. We can't be. Another example is Ezekiel Chapter 35, and this was an interesting example. Ezekiel, this is in the section of Ezekiel where it's judgments against the nations, and this is specifically judgment against Edom, who were kinsmen of the Israelites, that were descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew. And one of the things about the Edomites was that they were never really strong enough to oppose Israel on their own, but anytime anybody else opposed Israel, they were quick to jump on the bandwagon and go with them. And it says here that part of God's judgment against Edom, "Therefore, as I live, declares the Lord God, I will deal with you according to your anger and according to your envy, which you showed because of your hatred against them," against the Israelites. "So I will make myself known among them when I judge you."
There's your defense for what one's hatred and one isn't. That right there.
Yeah, your envy was showed. Envy was the outpouring of your hatred. You hated them, and in response to that hatred, you envied the relationship that they had with me, that I had with them. Rather than seeking a relationship with me on your own, you envied what they had, and you tried to destroy it. Every time that somebody aligned against Israel, Edom was there to jump on that bandwagon and try to destroy Israel. So it's just, God condemns it just outright as an expression of their hatred. And then, of course, this section is talked about, it's overcoming envy. Love is the remedy. And 1 Corinthians 13:4, love is patient, love is kind, and is not jealous. Love does not brag, and it is not arrogant. The older translations, like King James, says, love envieth not. So that's the word that is used in the older translations. But love is patient, love is kind, it is not jealous. You cannot love somebody and be envious of what they have. You cannot love somebody and be jealous of them. They're just not compatible, and despite what the world says. And so we've got to know that if I'm struggling with envy, what I need to do is fill my heart with love. And if I fill it with love, there'll be no room left for the envy. What can we do to overcome envy? Number 2, put on Christ. Romans 13:13 we just looked at a moment ago, but the next verse 14, goes on. "So let us behave properly as in the day, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual promiscuity and sensuality, not in strife and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh in regard to its lusts." So we talked about early on that envy is natural, demonic, earthly, worldly, right? And so that's the idea of the flesh there. That's our worldly side. That's our natural side is the flesh. And so it could be a natural, earthly way of thinking for us to see somebody else succeeding and for us to be envious. But we have to put that aside. We don't think in physical, earthly terms. We think in spiritual terms. And so we do that by putting on the Lord Jesus Christ. We clothe ourselves in Christ. We put on the new man. We are transformed by the renewing of his word, or the renewing of our minds through his word. And so we don't give room to those earthly, worldly, natural thoughts. We put on Christ and think spiritually. Number 3 is we grow up spiritually. It's an issue of maturity. We want to be mature, spiritually mature people. 1 Corinthians 3, verses 1 through 3. Paul wrote, "And I, brethren, could not speak to you as to spiritual men, but as to men of flesh, as to infants in Christ. I gave you milk to drink, not solid food, for you were not yet able to receive it. Indeed, even now you are not able, for you are still fleshly. For since there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not fleshly, and are you not walking like mere men?" I mean, Paul points to their jealousy and their envy as a sign of their spiritual immaturity. He said, I want to treat you like spiritual adults. I want you to treat you like spiritually mature people, but I can't even talk to you in those terms. I can't even address you as being spiritually mature or pretend that you're spiritually mature because look, you have envy and jealousy. And he lists some things in his corrective parts of the letter to them about specific things that they're being envious and jealous about. There was a brother taking another brother to court. That was purely motivated by jealousy or envy. That I'm going to sue my brother because he's got something that I think should be mine. And so, this is just, it's an indication of spiritual infancy if we are steeped in jealousy and envy. Doesn't mean we don't struggle with it from time to time or we don't have it crop up from time to time. But anytime we sense it or we know that it's cropping up or that we feel it cropping up in our lives, that's one thing that we can focus on is, wow, this is an immature reaction. This is an earthly reaction. I need to react spiritually. And so I need to be focusing on maturity. Yes?
I think you had this verse where, James 3:15, it says, the wisdom that comes down from above, backing up to verse 14, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast in the false to the truth. This is not wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly and spiritually demonic. I think verse 16 goes back to what we were saying earlier, for where jealousy, where envy and selfish ambition exist, this is where it leads. There will be disorder in every vile practice.
Right.
And then this slide, verse 17, says, but wisdom from above. And so the way you counteract this earthly wisdom is to grow up spiritually, to heed the advice from the wisdom that is from above, to grow up spiritually and listen to spiritual wisdom rather than earthly wisdom.
Right. That's such a good point that, we can almost list for any of these things that we're going to talk about in this whole book, when we're talking about, sins that can crop up in our lives or things that we need to deal with, spiritual maturity is going to be a hedge against all of those things. And anytime we see sin taking root in our lives or sin grabbing hold of how we want to react or whatever, that's always going to be an indication of immaturity. And so you're exactly right. We need to focus on that wisdom from above. Paul in Philippians 4:8, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is lovely, whatever is a good report. I know I get those out of order all the time. But he gives that long list of things. That's spiritual maturity. Think on these things. Focus on these things and don't get caught up in the earthly things. That's good. We talked a little bit about this one already. Now we're going to finally get to those verses in the middle. We looked at the verses before and after this, but Galatians 5:22 through 26, we need to walk by the Spirit. So we read that list of things that were fleshly before this section. So those were walking by the flesh. Now here's the opposite of those. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. Now those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also walk by the Spirit. Let us not become boastful, challenging one another, envying one another. And so, think of any of those things, the fruit of the Spirit. We sing the song on Sundays with the kids, but love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Is there room for envy in any one of those? And no. So if I'm focusing on those, if those are the things that are driving me forward, if those are the things that are motivating me, then there is no room for envy. Envy is left out in the cold where it should be. And so we combat envy by filling our lives with things that are not envy, with the opposite of what envy is. Number 5, be content. Envy is that where we look at something somebody else has and we don't like them for it. We're mad at them for having more than us or having something better than us. And if you would stop looking at what other people have, then you kind of go a long ways towards nipping envy in the bud. Be content with what we have. What God has given us is enough. So Paul there in Philippians 4, verses 11 and 12, not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means. I know also how to live in prosperity in any and every circumstance. I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. Physically, Paul is talking about being filled and hungry and physically having an abundance and having a need. But spiritually, Paul is always filled. Paul is always having an abundance because he's not letting those physical circumstances determine his spiritual health. He's not looking at a moment when he's got no money and saying, God, you're not blessing me spiritually. Well, that's not true. He was continually blessing Paul spiritually, even when Paul was in dire circumstances physically. And so Paul learned contentment by focusing on those spiritual things and not allowing the physical things to get him down. So we can overcome envy by contentment. The passage that Teresa was talking about a minute ago, or the idea of being humble. If we look at James chapter 4, James chapter 4, start in verse 5. Do you think that the scripture speaks to no purpose? And here's an interesting use of the word jealous. He jealously desires the Spirit which he has made to dwell in us. Now, is it okay that God is jealous?
Yes.
Okay, jealousy is one of those things that is kind of a two-sided coin. I would even make the case that there are, under certain circumstances, jealousy is an appropriate response for us to have. If I find out, Tracy's not in here, I'll pick on her anyway. If I find out that my wife is cheating on me, I'm going to feel jealous because she's giving something that belongs to me to somebody else. And that's an appropriate response. And so here, God, he jealously desires the Spirit which he has made to dwell in us. If we're giving that Spirit to somebody else, if we're giving our attention to somebody else other than God, God views that with jealousy, and that's an appropriate response. God gave us that Spirit. And if we're using it in other ways, if we're not giving it to him, it's okay for him to be jealous. So he jealously desires the Spirit which he has made to dwell in us. He gives a greater grace. Therefore, he says, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be miserable and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you. Envy, remember, is that idea that I see something somebody else has, and I'm going to knock them down in order to elevate myself. That was one of the things we said about envy. But what God says is humble yourself and I will exalt you. That's the opposite of envy.
Our whole discussion tonight, that's all I'm thinking is a severe lack.
Absolutely. There's definitely a relationship there that envy and humility are not compatible. Just like envy and love are not compatible. Okay. Well, thank you for your attention tonight. Appreciate your comments. And Johnny will be back next week for the next chapter. Which is ingratitude. Okay.
It's